Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to SVG Europe's Audio AI Forum. I'm Heather McLean, as you know. Today we're going to be discussing emerging applications of AI technology in audio production and also explore potential applications for the future of this technology, which is super exciting. We are awaiting the arrival of Professor Andy Meyer, University of Salford, Chair of Science, Communication and Future Media. So hopefully he'll be able to join us soon and join in the conversation. But we're going to start off with our fantastic chair, hostess with the mostess, Roger Charlesworth, and the excellent Fadi Malak, independent industry consultant, and Rob Oldfield, Salsa Sound co-founder and CEO. So I will now hand over to Roger and keep letting people in as they arrive.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks, Heather. It's great to see everybody. You know, this is such an interesting subject, and I think AI is something that our whole culture is beginning to sort of grapple with. And there are some aspects of this discussion, I think, that are specific to audio, but also I think we'll look at how AI is going to sort of drag audio along with it when we look at esports and volumetric video and other places where AI is being leveraged. And really AI is sort of playing an important part in lots of processes. And I wonder, Rob, maybe we'll just start with you, if you can just give us a little bit of kind of background in kind of where AI is impacting our world in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everyone, good afternoon. I mean, I guess the list is starting to become endless, isn't it? I mean, there was a point when AI was kind of just used by geeks in kind of small rooms and coding and all this kind of stuff, just looking at data science, whereas now AI is certainly well known right across, you know, in the general public. And I think people are very familiar with the kind of things that you expect AI to be doing and the kind of use cases that we're seeing. So, I mean, I think a big one at the moment is kind of chat bots, and you think you're having a conversation with a real person, and then it turns out that they just you know, it's just a server somewhere in San Francisco pretending to answer your customer queries, some of which can be great, some of which are really irritating. And then I think another use case that we see, and that is kind of like a touch point for a lot of individuals, not necessarily in the tech scene, is things like, you know, Netflix with their automatic suggestions of like, you seem to be this kind of person. I think you'll like this show. Some of which I think we'd probably all around this table be really grateful for, and some of which is kind of irksome because you're like, how do you know me? Or how do you think you know me? And so I think those two for me are two big areas where like most people are kind of like have a tangible touch point with AI. But then obviously, I guess kind of more serious and kind of future focused maybe are kind of automatic driving cars, where we're really being challenged to put our trust in this thing, which before I think it kind of engendered some mistrust amongst the general public. Now we're actually, you know, putting our lives in the hands of data science and number crunching computers to navigate us safely across the globe. So yes, I think it's touching lots of different points, and it's getting to the point now where we're actually, our lives are depending upon AI rather than it being reserved for a very small area of geekdom. And I think that's where I think audio comes into it. You know, we've got this incredible kind of underlying foundational backbone of AI technologies. And up to now, I think audio hasn't totally explored those. I think there's a lot more that we can do. And obviously we're seeing another big one actually, I guess, is voice recognition, which is kind of audio driven, and is something that we're really seeing big advances in. But yeah, I think there's a lot of scope for audio, and that's what hopefully we can sort of drill down into a little bit. And it'd be nice to hear the collective wisdom of the group of new ideas that we can do, things that we think would be good applications, things that definitely aren't good applications, also interesting for discussion.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about solving sort of our existing problems with AI, existing audio, say, production problems and real-time production and whatnot. But there's also, Fadi, there's also sort of a whole nother dimension of this, which is where AI is going in other media, right? And audio will kind of have to get dragged along there. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's as you're saying, that there's the, and then Rob was saying as well, is that there's AI for a lot of the workflow issues, and as well as just routine things that we do in our live workflows today, that AI will help improve, help streamline, or just make things easier so that you can focus on other things. And then there's also situations or applications, I should say, that there are not yet taking place, that AI is evolving at a pace that things that you thought weren't possible before are going to be possible. And we're seeing a lot of that, coming. A lot of people are placing the attention on use cases in the metaverse, but it doesn't necessarily have to be over there. And there's also cases where there's AI being used. You should say general AI. That's AI in other applications that then drive an audio application, as opposed to audio specific AI intelligence, which are pretty interesting. And I think that's what kind of you were alluding to, Roger.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting as we get into sort of the metaverse or the near metaverse of virtualization in general. If we're building these virtualized 3D environments, whether they're in esports or whether they're volumetric video or whatever, then they're very much being driven by AI, but then there's an audio component, or needs to be an audio component to them. And that feels like an area where we will have to do a whole lot more AI with audio to keep up with those virtualized environments. And Rob, you guys did a little bit, you guys have sort of scratched the surface with that a little bit with some of your work with volumetric video.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is a brilliant use case of AI, because we're getting to that point where if you want to give everybody a completely bespoke, unique experience for themselves, then you cannot rely on an individual mixing for, say, 10,000 viewers plus. There has to be an element of automation. And when it comes to doing things in volumetrics or like metaverse, if you use that phrase, then you want people to be able to view the content from different angles, customize their own viewpoint. And that's one of the things that we're working with BT on, that 5G Edge XR project I think I've spoken about before in this forum, where we're giving people the ability to change camera perspectives, pan around, maybe change audio attributes, whether you want to kind of trigger different commentaries or raise and lower the level. And all of that technology rests on the underpinning object-based audio framework. And without that, you're not able to create a bespoke experience. You can create a really great bespoke visual experience, and heck, we're really good at that. Like, there's a lot of companies doing that kind of thing, but augment that with a really great individualized audio experience, that's a little bit more tricky. And that's where AI really comes into it, both in terms of kind of offering somebody a bespoke rendering, which could happen in the cloud, or, and I think possibly more importantly, actually getting an understanding of the scene. You know, we're really familiar with recording a scene. The microphone's been around for centuries, but, or, you know, rare arts, but actually having an understanding of the scene is something that we are not so good at as an industry up to now. And I think that's where we need to be. So it's taking the sensors that you've got in the place. I guess primarily we'd say they're microphones, but they could be accelerometers, or we might leverage some visuals in that as well. But taking the available sensors and the data and trying to make sense of the audio environment, and then using AI to do that, to segment the different components, triangulate them so we know where the sound sources are in space and what their attributes are, so that then we can offer people a bespoke rendering. And it's, in my mind, not possible to do that using traditional manual techniques, because, you know, we've only got two hands and one brain. So trying to make that many mixes for such a vast number of people, I think, is just not possible, not sustainable. And that's where AI comes to the fore, in being able to offer those different versions or different experiences to individuals around the globe.
Well, and I want to get back to sort of the mundane problems that we're trying to solve today, but it sounds like, I mean, do we even have, it sounds like this sort of idea of a volumetric audio, is that a fair, is that a fair term to say? How do we, you know,
absolutely, yeah,
we're
that'd
going
be
to virtualize the audio so that we can move within this sort of volume, whether it's virtualized in a esports context, or whether it's sort of a hybrid using biometric tracking.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, isn't it? We're moving, I think, more and more our lives are spent in gaming engines, whether we know it or not, and producing a volumetric audio that fits within a Unity or an Unreal context is where we need to be, you know, so that viewers can actually watch a live show as if it was a gaming environment, and they have freedom of perspective, and therefore freedom of audio perspective. So yes, it's the segmentation and the understanding of that scene that's really important, so that you create not just a couple of audio viewpoints, but actually you have a volumetric representation of the audio sound field, I guess, right across the space, so that as you move, you actually hear differently and appropriately, because it's got to be accurate. Mm-hmm. And it's been shown countless times that has a huge effect on people's perception of the overall experience. So people actually vote a visual experience to be superior in quality, even if it's less good, if you give them a better audio, which I kind of think is crazy, but that's people's perception for you. You give them a good audio, and regardless of the video quality, they think it's better.
Yeah, well, there you go. Audio, you know.
Yeah, top of the tree.
Gotta have audio. And those kind of experiences, Fadi, I think that we're kind of maybe just sort of scratching the surface, but it seems like those kind of virtualized experiences now are becoming, they're sort of coming thick and fast, that's really growing. And whether it's in esports or this sort of merging world of real sports and esports, and, you know, volumetric capture, that's kind of, is that sort of becoming a bigger part in the future of our sort of sports experience?
I mean, I definitely think so. It's a sort of a natural evolution of the capture, storytelling, delivery. But I think whether it's, you know, a visually led sort of leap, where you are then, in order to produce the best, the appropriate experience, like Rob was saying, you're letting information being captured by other sensors driving the audio experiences to be able to convey that level of realism and immersion. But I think it's also a powerful tool just for storytelling that's still controlled by the artists, and it doesn't have to be a free for all. It's just a a better way to more accurately represent or render an experience that could be captured and conveyed, to audiences. So, but with gaming, it's already known to be the norm is a free for all. So that's not really an issue. So this is more of a gamification of other forms of media, but with of course a changing set of rules that are very much in the crawl, walk, run. They're in the crawling stage at this point.
But we're going to see, as you say, the gamification. We're going to see somebody watching. We're going to start watching virtualized, real sports virtualized in such a way that we are able to be on the field or whatever, or see things from any perspective that we want to. Well, let's get to the practical, and this is sort of a branching that we talked about, is like, where's media going and where will media be dragging audio along with it, which I think is what we've kind of been talking about for the last few minutes. But what about sort of solving today's problems? And I know, Rob, guys have done a lot of work in sort of AI assisted mixing, and been fairly successful with your development there in sort of augmenting or duplicating what's done in, say, a typical football match.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, really, that we're talking about it in this way round, because this is exactly the story of our company, because we started off being very future focused in terms of the problems that we're trying to solve. And in our world, object-based audio is king, and we went after that really, really early. And one of the fundamental problems with that is, of course, how do you get these objects? If you wanted to have separate sound sources, how does that make any sense? It might make sense in an orchestral environment where you could closely mic different objects, but that is not something that is possible certainly in live sports. And so that's how we developed our AI, to be able to extract, and like I was mentioned before, kind of make sense of a scene, sort of put some semantics around it, figure out what are the sound sources, where are the sound sources, and kind of some different attributes around it. And so we developed this AI. We were specifically looking at soccer at the time, and to extract every point in time where the ball was kicked and actually extract that kick sound or the whistle sound or the crossbar as an audio object in itself. And we had this grand vision of like being able to pan things around and zoom in and out, and kind of is very metaversey, but before the metaverse was the thing. And what we realized was actually that level of granularity, whilst is really great from a kind of R&D perspective, is less useful for where current workflows were at. And so, but we did recognize that actually having these microphones distributed around the field of play and being able to listen to those and intelligently extract the interesting sound sources was pretty much what a sound engineer is doing in a truck, raising and lowering the level of faders to be able to capture the sounds that you want and kind of keep the crowd sound under control. So that's how we ended up becoming, bringing our technology to current workflows for assistive mixing, because we did it so that each microphone is listening all the time, passing it through AI. When it detects a sound that it's interesting in the context, so like a racket hit in tennis or a ball kick in football or basketball bounce or whatever, it then automatically adds that microphone into the mix and composes a compelling on-court field of play mix based on that. And so for me, that's actually a really great use of AI, because it provides a bit of a lean back approach for a sound supervisor to have, okay, I've got my pitch mix being done automatically. It frees me up to perform other tasks. And having done that, obviously there's a load more that we realized we could apply the AI to kind of understand what's going on in terms of the commentary. And so obviously you've got kind of speech to text elements in there, but also kind of emotion analysis to kind of, is the commentator particularly excited, or is he shouting or whispering? I don't know if commentators ever whisper, but they do sometimes. Certainly in snooker, there's a lot of whispering going on in snooker commentaries. And just, I think our journey of Salsa Sound is figuring out, whoa, there's so much information in the sound that I think we've binned off historically in favor of going after an audio recording. We've left the data behind, and there's so much data in these sensors that we've got all around our scene. And so, yes, looking at what's going on with the commentary, voice activity detection, speaker identification, or speech to text, that can be used to then intelligently add a commentary to a background crowd. And also analyzing that crowd, we've got all of the metrics to how excited the crowd are, not just how loud they are, but actually how vociferous are they. Like, are they booing, or are they cheering, or are they disappointed? Like in the UK, for example, we have a lot of ironic cheers. Don't seem to get it so much in the US, but that kind of, he's like falling on his bum or whatever. Then all of those kind of things are interesting to me, because it's kind of, how is the crowd responding? You know, and sometimes we go after trying to analyze the video, you know, to pull out when the match highlights are. But I personally think there's more information in audio than there is in video, because you've got the collective opinion of 60-odd thousand fans telling you whether a particular moment was exciting, whether it was, you know, a disaster, whether it was comedy or whatever. And actually, I think there's more information, or as much information as there is in the video. So yeah, you have to stop me. I'm starting to ramble.
Well, no, but this is highlights. I mean, that's an application, right, Fadi? That's an application for AI in video sort of already, and also in audio, of analyzing something for determining training and AI to look for highlights or figure out what went on. But also, so what you're saying though, Rob, is that by utilizing the thinking of the microphone as a sensor, then you're identifying, you're extrapolating what's happening on the field. Not only are you saying, okay, we'll ride this microphone up and ride the other ones down to catch this kick, but effectively you can also sort of track where the ball is.
Yeah.
Just by listening by utilizing all the microphones, you can sort of say, well, this is where the ball is. And it's interesting, you kind of contrast it to the Lavo kick, which uses the ball tracking video or graphics to then decide which microphones to open.
Yeah, it's kind of the reverse.
You guys listen with all the microphones, and based on what the microphones are hearing, decide which microphone to open, which in turn gives you some metadata, which tells you where the ball is.
Yeah, I think there's some advantages. I mean, there's advantages to both methodologies, but I think I like the idea of just using audio, because audio is so cheap. You know, microphones are everywhere, and they don't cost a lot of money, and it's not a big problem to get people to sling out a couple of extra mics. And so I think what is useful about doing auto mixing this way is when you think about enabling lower tier sports, for example, you want to keep costs down rather than start ramping up infrastructure that's needed. And so having a system that's based on microphones and being controlled by AI, for me, is a really strong use case there, because you can put out another 4 microphones. It doesn't cost you any money particularly. And if you've got a computer that's running that mix for you, you don't need the same level of experience. You know, I'm sure loads of people on this call have mixed a football game, but football's particularly difficult. And if you have given it a try, trying to kind of raise and lower 12, 13 plus faders in response to the action on the pitch, in my mind, it's almost impossible, because I'm not good at that kind of stuff. But, you know, it takes a lot of experience. And so if you want to try and enable
particularly to do it without pumping and without,
yeah,
to I mean, that's one of the advantages of automating this is if you're opening the right microphone, then you can close other microphones just the right amount without having it
And
pumping.
the other cool thing that we're doing at the moment is like automatically controlling the EQ so that you match the EQ between the microphones that you fade across, which is another thing that's really good when you're doing software-based mixing, because you're analyzing the sound all the time. And that, you know, you've probably heard this countless times when the action goes from one end of the arena to the other, and the timbral difference between those two microphones is tangibly very different. And so, I mean, maybe not everyone notices, but I certainly notice it. You're like, oh, it's changed. You know, we're in this kind of whole new soundscape down the other end of the field, some of which I quite like, but I think it's too abrupt. And like you say, you hear that pumping, which is why we do the EQ matching, to be able to do a crossfade that's not only power matched, but is also EQ matched, so that you don't sort of feel that kind of discombobulation, audio discombobulation. I'm coining that phrase as it goes from one end of the pitch to the other.
Yeah. Well, and are there other things we can do with EQ too? I mean, why can't, in other situations, in say a newscast or something, why can't we automate EQ and dynamics and say, you know, make it right? Make this sound right. Or we've trained you what this is supposed to sound like. This person, train the AI to say, well, this is what this person should sound like, and the mic's in a slightly different position, or the set is a little bit different. And what about, I mean, you know, what about Fadi? What about we sort of see this sort of lack of skilled operators. We have fewer people coming in as operators, and is there this sort of opportunity to de-skill some of these things, or enable the creativity by allowing people to use tools that let them do what they want to do creatively without necessarily having the fine craft skills of how to get what they want?
Yeah, it's a touchy question, but I think you're
so I gave it to you.
Yeah. Definitely in the near term, I would, it's definitely going to be more in the realm of assistance tools, just helping ease the burdens of let's say a live mixing, or so that you could focus more on the artistic sort of creation of it, and I think that is definitely the way it's currently aiming at. Overall, over time, I think it's going to, as you allow it, as people allow it, it could take over more and more of the functions. But even if it became a completely all AI-driven automated world, I think there is something that could be said for, over time. I think humanity would lose out in the sense of losing that sort of innovative, creative new approaches. I think even though AI probably would evolve into creating some new things on its own, I think probably in our career time frame, that I don't think it will not be able to replace what humans can come up with as thinking out of the box and approaching things differently, because it's most of the time learning from things that we have done in the past, and following a variation of that formula. Would you agree, Rob?
100%. And I think that's a really important point, is that, you know, everything that we're doing is based on some kind of training data. You know, that's the biggest challenge with AI, that seems sometimes like a black box of magic, that you just throw problem into AI and out comes miraculous solution. I think is probably the general public's, you know, version of what AI is, whereas actually it's the very, very tough, it's difficult process, you know, taking all of that real world content and creating a training set that you then get your AI to learn from. And like you're saying, Fadi, like most of the time that learning is based on kind of creative endeavors from people. And so we'll always have a cap on how good AI can be, which would be like the creativity of humans. So if we can't lose that. So I think for me, this is it. We're going to need an increase in creativity really to use these tools and to use them well. You know, that it's sorry,
well,
Roger.
and this sort of democratization of it, I mean, it presumably empowers super creative people who can do more because they have these tools, or can train the AI in a way that does something special that's hard to do.
Yeah.
It allows them to produce a better production. So that's happening on one side. And then there's also, it sort of trickles down to just to somebody who's less skilled being able to do a passable job because they're getting
I guess that's it.
Mixing.
It's the two sort of words of today, isn't it? Do more and do it better and do it for less. You know, those are kind of the three things that I guess are industry challenges. And I think AI can address all three of those really.
Yeah.
So it's enables lower tier stuff, you know, produce more content that kind of is maybe hyper local and kind of appeals to more niche audiences. But then at a higher tier level, actually you can get AI to do some of the grunt work that enables you to be more creative, or to create the ball group automatically that is pulling out every kick and actually enhancing that and making sure you've got a really a stable object, which is, by the way, becoming more and more important as we move towards immersive technologies. And then obviously it's cost saving for simplifying workflows.
Well, and that, creating the ball group, that's all pretty effective right now. I mean, the stuff that you guys are working on is pretty effective. What about, you know, the sort of auto versioning? You know, we've had a fair amount of sort of, I would say, algorithmic auto mixing, use it in auto versioning. And some of that's quite effective. Does AI play a role in auto versioning? And obviously, as we kind of are distributing, or for a host broadcaster, we're distributing more and more stuff to more and more people. Auto versioning becomes kind of fairly important.
Yeah.
And does AI have a role there?
Yeah, it definitely does. I don't think it's necessarily the role, because I think one of the things with AI is that you got to understand the things that you need it for, and then the things that you don't. You know, sometimes you don't want to just keep throwing AI every single problem that you've got, because it might not be the right tool for the job. And there's a lot that you can do with algorithmic processing. And I know that Ewan from Llama would have a lot to say about that as well. I think where AI can add value with this kind of thing is some of the stuff I mentioned before. Like, we've come across a lot of cases where it's useful to know the emotion of a commentator, and that can help tune how your voice activity detection works, so that you can appropriately scale the level of it and not kind of jump to incorrect conclusions about how loud that commentary is. So you can get can help produce a more stable mix if you've got a sort of more contextual analysis of it, which I think AI is good for. I think other areas where I would like to see developments is automatic language detection, because then you can start distributing different languages without people going, oh crap, that's Portuguese, not Spanish, you know, which somebody might not necessarily know the difference of immediately, but actually an AI can easily do that problem, and can start labeling and tagging mixes automatically, even if it's just a suggestion of this stream is called this, whatever, and attributing metadata to that, I think is a case where AI is particularly well suited to. And I think sort of coupled with that, for me, another area where I think AI is certainly from our work, and I think others as well, is looking at automatic quality control checks. And that's another one where AI can provide a strong guiding hand, because we know we've got so many historic mixes, so much content that we can train algorithms on to go, this is objectively a good mix. It doesn't contain these things which historically we've seen as problems, like glitches or hums or bad signal to noise ratios or quiet commentaries and things like that. And that can be quite tricky to do algorithmically, but using AI, you've got a lot more scope to pick out some more granular statistics around that can flag up some early issues of, hey, this mix isn't quite right, or we've got bleed in the top, in the, our height channels. We don't want commentary in our Atmos mix, thank you very much, in the heights. So do something about that. So I think there's a big part to play, an important part to play in that, because if you're churning out 10s, 20s mixes, then having automation in the mix is great, but you don't want to have to then have an individual QCing all of those different mixes, because it kind of defeats the object a bit.
Yeah, just to tag on to that, actually, I think you've circled around a lot of the things, Rob, but I think one thing you may have implied, but I'll just call it separately to Roger's question about versioning. I mean, one of the key sort of underlying technologies going forward that people arguably say that is needed for creating versioning in a more intelligent way is through the creation of objects and object-based media, object-based audio, and definitely AI could play a role in helping create objects in a more accurate manner, a more fluid manner, a more automated manner.
100%. Sorry, carry on here.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically the point. I mean, just even things that have been challenged in the recent past, with sound source separation. I think AI is on the verge of really changing that dramatically to the point where you're able to capture things that in a live situation that you never thought would be possible in terms of isolation, and create your little object there. And then you have a lot better way of doing the versioning via rules in object-based media.
It is a very good point that that's kind of the blind source separation. I mean, if you go through the literature, it really reached like a kind of a brick wall in terms of what we could do with DSP. And then in the emergence of like AI technologies, I guess not, going back probably to the 90s, I suppose, but certainly accelerated in the last decade, is, AI has massively improved what can be done in terms of blind source separation. And like I'm saying, understanding a scene. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment is revamping a lot of our upmix algorithms, because that's an area where AI and being able to understand the content that you've got enables you to do an intelligent upmix, like a content aware upmix, if you like, rather than just kind of going, set these parameters and hit enter. Actually, you can have the AI listen to the content and go, right, this is our background noise. This has got the diffuse parameters. Obviously, this is the speech. That's kind of like the easy one. And then these are our more diegetic sounds. And we want those kind of front and center, so that you don't end up with weird bleed in the height channels or the rear channels that shouldn't be there. And, with a lot of kind of traditional upmix technologies, that's what does happen, every now and again, the content throws you a curveball. So having the AI being aware of the content and creating an upmix accordingly, I think is pretty important. And that way you've got the ability to take a stereo international sound and upmix it to your 5.1, 5.14, 22.2, or whatever format is your flavor of the month.
So you use AI to actually pick out what these individual sounds are, and then decide whether it's the bleed from the PA, we'll put it in the heights.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I should say we're not quite there yet. I'm not saying we've like solved all these problems, but that's our approach to it, so that it's not just a kind of a generic one-size-fits-all algorithm, but actually it's a kind of this is let's let this machine learn the content, learn the kind of content that it would normally experience, and understand this is diffuse, this is discrete, this is speech, this is PA, just to, you know, take out a few different scenarios. And yeah, I think that's an important field, because you don't want to have to keep producing multiple versions of you know, mono through to 514 plus. You know, it's be useful to have intelligent up and down mixing algorithms that could do a good job of that.
Yeah. I'm just looking through the questions. I think we've hit a lot of these, Fadi. Was there one that you kind of, in terms of chat,
yeah,
you were?
I think the last one that came in before mine, I think Rob was circling around that a bit. That's something we could talk to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, will, you know, do we get to, listen, there are a lot of sports that we can't cover, or that we cover sort of in a minimal or half-assed way because the production budget doesn't cover it. Do we think, you know, do we see a sort of entirely software-based production? And are there enhancements to an entirely software-based production? So if we're doing AFE of changes in perspective or something like that, in a way, does going to an AI-based system maybe enable us to do more with that? So first question, entirely software-based mixing. Second question, what are the potential enhancements that enables?
First question, my answer would be yes. I think that is possible. And I think it entirely will happen, virtualized in the cloud, so that you've basically have somebody kind of connecting signals together, sending up to the cloud, and we'll have a automatic production that could cover multiple languages and multiple formats. I don't see why that's not possible. You know, certainly from an audio point of view, we do that already. You know, you know, it's once you've got your profile set, it mixes the pitch, mixes the crowd, mixes the commentary, boom. So I definitely see that as possible, and I know that video's made you know, huge strides in being able to do automatic video production. So yes. In terms of enhancements, I mean, I'd kind of like the idea of video follow audio rather than audio follow video, as a little an aside. I mean, part of that's ridiculous, because obviously light travels faster than sound. So, you know, I get that that's not totally possible. But in terms of highlighting maybe areas of the crowd which could be useful to spot at. So, you know, obviously have like beauty cams and things like that in a live production, but you could have like one that's specifically focusing on the crowd that's actually chanting, or like I say, booing or clapping. And so I think there's some enhancements there that using the audio data actually enables you to do more than if you just utilize video data. So I think there's some enhancements there. And I think just in terms of computers are quite good at this kind of stuff, and audio has got there's a lot of information in audio. I mean, we study audio. That's like what we do as a company. So you can hear so much just with your ears in terms of understanding what's going on at an event. And to training a computer to interpret that is, I think it's just got so much potential. And it means that you can create, like I say, a stable mix, which otherwise is very, very challenging to do. And you can make sure that you get all of the sounds that you actually want as part of that mix. So I firmly believe that, yes. Does that answer the question? Yes.
Well,
I
and
think
that's been sort of a focus of yours, is to sort of be able to pick up the bar or the kick, or in baseball, the crack mic or whatever, while maintaining a sort of stable, as you say, a stable mix without having it all go pumpy and weird. because
which is a really big deal in American football, particularly with the parabs, because you get, if you listen to a lot of American football, you get massive difference in the pitch effects. Whereas if you let that be controlled by software, like intelligently controlled software that's listening out for which parab is actually picking up the content on the field the best, then you can get that stable object which doesn't disorientate viewers. So that is a big enhancement.
Yeah. Well, and then the second half of my question, then if you can do that, does it start to become, if you're in that environment, then easier to say, let's have a completely different perspective because we're going to the sideline shot? Then if we're able to sort of automate that effects mix, then is it easier to sort of instantaneously blend to, okay, we're going in the tunnel or we're going to the sidelines or whatever, and have the perspective follow?
Yeah, I like this idea. I think there's work to be done. I mean, I sometimes in a live production, a manually produced production, that's done. So there's been more of a trend recently with cameras that are closer into the crowd. So goal is scored, touchdown, try, you name it, and then they'll pan round and you can sort of hear the individuals cheering. So you get that kind of that close proximity, part of which I really like, because I like that. I want to feel more in touch with the action on the pitch, but also the fans in the crowd. That's what helps me buy into it. You know, that's part of our mantra at Salsa Sound, is, you know, putting people close to the action and closer to the fans in the stands. But I find it a little clunky at times. And I think because you've got that difference in sound stage, you know, the timbre is different, the dynamics are very different. And sometimes the level can be a little bit different as well. So I think, I mean, yes, it's kind of a cool idea to change the perspectives. And I think that's where having an automatically matched EQ and kind of keeping a handle on the levels is important, so that it's not jarring to the viewer, but that actually adds value, because you don't want it to just be a gimmick. It needs to add value for me, and it needs to put people closer to the action.
Well, and there's lots of sports where we do this to a certain degree. In golf, you know, going from hole to hole, each hole sounds different, but leveraging sort of assisted mixing to make that transition smoother, change the perspective, but have the transition be smoother and more consistent. Seems like there's some interesting opportunities there.
Yeah. I did like the idea of, I still like the idea of this, of like even taking in the pan and tilt information from the vision mixer and being able to adjust the soundscape based on that. But it opens up a can of technological worms, which like is difficult to address. But yeah, I do like that idea of different perspectives. And you know, that project with the extended reality experiences is exactly that. You know, we've got like it working on an Oculus, and you can look around the stands and you can hear the sound field pan around you, and then you can jump to a different perspective. And actually it's really, really cool. Like jump into the, like, what does it sound like behind the goal, or what does it sound like from the, you know, the top tier, or, you know, wherever you happen to have your visual perspectives or audio perspectives. Really cool experience. And for me, it does add when you move your head. I should say a shameless plug, actually, if you want to actually experience that, come to IBC. We'll be showing that at IBC, so you can actually, it's real. You can have a bit of a place. I don't know what booth we're on, but find us somewhere in Hall 8.
Yeah. I'm looking through the chat. Any other questions jump out?
There's one there about language interpretation, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
We've recently worked on a project that we did in partnership with Salford University on looking at that, because if you try to apply you know, automatic translators or transcribers, I mean to say, to sports commentaries, for example. It's really, really difficult. You know, the way that sports commentators talk, they often don't finish sentences properly. They get really carried away with stuff. They use odd words that don't make any sense in the context. You know, we've got a lot of, I'm sure it's the same across the globe, but in England, we have a lot of kind of bizarre idioms that only make sense for football, like hitting the woodwork, for example. And so what we've found is that using kind of off-the-shelf speech-to-text stuff, not great. And so we've seen an appetite in the industry to create like automatic speech-to-text. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on lately, is specifically trained on sports commentaries, so that because there's a lot of resource that goes into transcribing what's going on in a sports commentator, and even a human translator struggles. So we've sort of approached it a bit differently, using sort of bigraph descriptions of words, so that the audio picks out the different sounds and then compares it with a sort of spell and grammar checker, which so far, you know, slightly early days, but so far we're getting some really good results with that, and understanding kind of the differences between commentary and just standard speech in a room has been an interesting journey. So I guess,
so you can train the auto translate to, or translate the auto transcription, you can train it with some jargon.
It's trained in the context is the important, as with all this AI stuff, it's training the networks and the algorithms to work in the context, so having contextual material. So commentaries is just a difficult situation. Sorry, Fadi.
No, I was just going to say that this one example to me is a clear area where AI is definitely going to improve and get to the point where not only will it master, you know, most of the spoken languages, it will get to the idioms and slang of different regions as well. So to the point. So I think this is a very practical, good evolution of, you know, AI, you know, getting better until it's got it.
Yeah.
Well, it'll have to eventually learn the idiom that it's translating to, because there'll be some Brazilian expression for a crazy idiomatic expression for the thing that there's a crazy idiomatic expression in English for, right?
Yeah.
That'll be really interesting, is to sort of marry that AI, if it's got to the point where it's picking up the expressions and then using as prompting for one of those DALL-E visual AI, and seeing what kind of weird imagery you get with those expressions.
Yeah, that'd be kooky.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because even we've received some transcribed data from some broadcasters, and even looking at that the human translator makes mistakes with some of this stuff. So again, like our machine can only work as well as a human translator does, but we're working on it. Is that another question, I guess, linked with speech, in terms of the kind of denoising, which I think is an important element of speech, because obviously you've got a commentator in an arena of 80,000 plus fans. There's a lot of noise on that, despite the microphones that are used, and there could be crosstalk between other commentators who are kind of sat pretty close to them. And so having an AI that's actually understanding who's speaking and what the kind of characteristics of their voice afford you a lot of options in terms of denoising, because it's like I say, it's content aware denoising, rather than just saying this is my noise profile, can you remove it? It's actually saying this is my target profile, can you enhance it and you know, remove everything else. So there's I think there's a lot of ground to be won there still, something that we're keen to pursue as well. And this comes particularly, I've spent a fair bit of time in the US lately, and this to me is like a huge problem over there, because you've got this PA system that's particularly well, it's just crazy loud, isn't it? Sort of like hitting 110 dB in the stands and ridiculous
Basketball.
calls. Yeah, basketball's the worst. And whilst I think you want,
no one's heard of a Coles microphone over here either, too.
yeah. So there are things that you can do with that, but for me, you want to have that PA because that's part of the experience. Like, you don't want to kind of just pretend there was no PA at the basketball arena, because that's not, not a good faithful representation. It's not good storytelling to remove something that was actually there. But you do want to have control over your mix, and to have that level of PA coming through on every single microphone is not great from a control point of view. And so where I see AI being really useful there is actually, again, having this content aware denoising, because your microphones for the most part remain static in these environments. And so AI can learn the transfer function, so how the sound gets from the PA to that specific microphone, which kind of gives you a lot more scope for noise removal, or for reducing the level, rather than just sort of like going, oh, I wonder whether we could cancel it out. That doesn't really work if you don't understand the transfer function, the path of how the sound gets from the speaker to the microphone. But during the course of a game, it doesn't take long for a kind of half-trained AI to learn the characteristics of that PA, learn how that sound gets to the microphone, and then intelligently denoise it. So not that you get rid of it totally, but just gives you that control back again, so that the A1 can put the PA a little bit in the overheads, for example, and not have it bleed through absolutely everything. So I think there's some cool stuff. There's a cool project to be had in that space to ramp up what we can do and give control back to sound.
And everything that we use, plugins and tools that we use today, are all kind of single-ended. And
yes,
it's like they have the ability to be intelligent and closed-looped. And this is the sound I'm looking for. Get rid of things that aren't that sound.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I guess in baseball is a good example for that, isn't it? That you can say, I'm specifically listening for back crack, so shut down the PA that's bleeding through, and specifically listening out for that signature sound.
gotta have the back.
Gotta have it.
Crack.
Weird if you don't.
Gotta have the back crack. You could fake the back.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's people have been doing that for years. I mean, in darts, I think it's the sound of like a bass drum, isn't it? That they trigger it off a accelerometer rather than a microphone. So when it hits the dartboard, actually, it's like a triggered sample of a bass drum, because that sounds cooler and doesn't have any actual noise, And that's what I mean. That's one of the things that we've been doing in the football context, is to use all the information from our AI to play over the top of the audio a pre-recorded sample of a ball kick, so that no matter where the action is on the field, you still got the ability to hear that ball sound that people really like, and kind of give that consistency across the pitch.
So the AI can detect that the ball's been kicked. It can detect a ball kick, but it doesn't sound as punchy as you'd like it to. So you augment it with a sample. I
mean, we see this a lot. So if you listen to a lot of pitch side microphones, you very often go back in time. When we were first developing this, I was manually listening myself, all of the microphone feeds from some Premier League matches, trying to listen out for when the ball was kicked. So I would tag it and then send it across to our AI to go, look, this is a ball kick. And that's how, you've got to do that with thousands of samples. It's quite laborious. But I started off doing it with just audio only, and it's a complete non-starter. You can't really hear most of them. But if you put the video on, you can see when the ball was kicked, and you're like, actually, I can just, I think, hear that kick. And so what we've determined was actually, the AI can actually become better at hearing kicks than our ears. And that's where we've got it up to at the moment, so that we've regularly will pick up kicks in sort of 8-9 microphones around the pitch that could be up to sort of 80 meters away from the action. They can still detect the kick, even if it's almost inaudible in that microphone. And so what we wanted to be able to do is just put a little bit of that high frequency energy back, so that you just not so much that you feel like you're playing a Sega Master System or anything ridiculous like that, but enough so that you get that pop back in the mix, so that you're not sort of thinking, why is this sound breaking my speakers when it's a corner, but completely inaudible when it's, you know, a free kick in the middle of the pitch. And so just, again, it's just bringing that consistency so that, you know, hopefully viewers don't think about the audio, they just think about the experience. And I think that's often the benchmark of success with us sound people, is that if people don't notice it, you're probably doing great. If they notice it, you got an issue.
We
Yeah,
were talking
exactly.
about auto versioning, and what about audio description and integrating audio description? And as we kind of become more and more focused on accessibility issues, certainly that's an important thing over here. Does AI play a role in that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is one of the key areas, as Rob was alluding to in detection, but this is more of a object recognition, whether it be a visual AI or audible AI, but basically to be able to describe what's happening without having a human present. That will, you know, blow this lid wide open on the audio description, to be able to generate that sort of accurate information to create a script that could be then, you know, read off and create an audio description track. I think that's one of the
That's interesting. Yeah,
low-hanging fruit, but very cool application for accessibility.
Sorry, is that low-hanging fruit? Are you saying that you would get the AI
No.
to automatically create a description
Yes.
without human input?
Yes, over time. I mean, of course, like you said, this stuff is going to be, you know, crawl, walk, run. It's going to start with lots of errors, and it'll improve over time. But it's the tech is already there, where it's able to do, you know,
Analyze the video, decide
Yeah.
what's going on, and
Exactly.
create the description automatically. And that's coming on.
Yeah. That's
exactly.
pretty cool. Yeah, I like that.
And I mean, I think that's an example of, again, of AI outside of audio then coming into audio.
Yeah, I mean, audio's got a small part to play in that as well, I think. You know, it's always good to have more than one data stream, and that's one of the things that we're hearing from our clients as well, is kind of, can you augment the data feeds that we've currently got, you know, whether that's kind of location of kicks or like referee whistle blows or kind of other events that are going on. Can you tag those major and minor events just to augment other data feeds? So yeah, it could be, does involve a bit of audio, but yeah, I guess it's visual as well. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, audio still has a big part to play in just improving the audio description experiences, where with the just the speaker intelligibility and where you place the sound, how you would balance it out with other sounds, and all that stuff is still, you know, very important.
Definitely, and having them, you know, as obviously separate objects. I mean, this is where, I mean, this is not sort of exactly the topic of this, but you know, I think this is where object-based audio is an absolute necessity to enable different experiences for different audiences, and to have an interaction. So you could, for example, position an audio description at a specific speaker in the room, perhaps. So, you know, the elderly lady in the corner can have the audio description, but it's not so off-putting for other people. So I think there's a huge shout out for our object-based audio friends there. I think the other element of where I think AI could come into this, if you've got an audio description that you've actually segmented, then you can play it back at an appropriate time. So for example, we've got a voice activity detector that runs with the commentary, obviously, and then so we know when the commentator is or isn't speaking. But actually, with a semantic analysis, you can say, oh, he's actually got to the end of a sentence. This is an appropriate time to duck the level of the commentary and pull in the your audio description, which I think is
and that's the and that's the sort of complaint about that, is that when you're doing adding live description live, it's hard to sort of balance, and you're riding on top of somebody who may be talking.
Yeah.
So taking that, automating that process, but also making it work in the time domain, shifting slightly in the time domain back and forth to make it fit in better. It seems like something that would have value to shift in the time domain, and then also to be able to automate that. Say, okay, we're coming to an end of the sentence, and I can tell from the inflection that somebody's about to come to their point, and now we're going to drop it in.
Yeah, and I think having a semantic understanding of what's being said is pretty important, because I know Ben on this call as well would have things to add to this, but we've done at Salford University, when I know the researchers there have done a lot of work in terms of kind of narrative importance, which elements of the content are particularly important, not just as kind of background sound, but what's useful for someone to understand what's going on in the context. So what are those diegetic sounds that you need in order to understand what's happening? So, in a film context, the sound of somebody's footsteps walking across the room if they're about to punch somebody, that's a really important sound, because that says there's impending doom or whatever. But the sound of some bird tweeting in the background, yeah, it's great for people who are, have got great hearing, and it adds to the experience, but it doesn't actually tell you what's going on in the storyline.
So is there a piece of jargon for this?
Yeah.
Narrative
importance.
Yeah, Google narrative importance, and Ben Shirley and Lauren Ward particularly done some really awesome work on that. And it particularly in an object-based setting, enable you to just change one parameter, and you can kind of increase or decrease elements that would be considered important to the narrative. But the reason I'm saying that is that you could do a similar thing even with audio description, because you could say, well, let's actually only you want to give somebody a seamless experience of the content, and part of that's the commentary, part of that's the audio description. So which elements, which phrases are really necessary, and which do you want the commentator or do you want the audio description? So I don't have any answers to this, by the way, but I just think that might be quite a cool way of getting a bigger bang for the buck by using some AI to actually understand what's going on, and appreciating that somebody might want to be watching audio description while someone in the same room might potentially not.
Yeah, interesting. Heather, do we want to open this up to any other questions? Anybody want to turn on their camera and have a comment? Or
Sure, yeah. If anyone wants to join in, please do.
I think we have a few minutes left. There's Ewan. I think one of the questions was that we talked about the other day too, is sort of AI versus algorithmic mixing. And I guess as a user, as I'm applying this technology, there are some things we can do with AI that we can't do. But looking at it from a practical standpoint, we're doing computational analysis on something, and we're applying, we're doing something based on that computational analysis. And I guess does it really matter from my perspective as, say, an operations person, whether this is AI-based assisted mixing or whether this is an algorithmic assisted mixing? And is there really is there much practical difference? You want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating. The whole topic has been fascinating. So thanks everyone for the conversations. But I think we've always approached it maybe from a slightly different perspective. Rob and I have shared many beers discussing this topic, and I think probably the joke is that perhaps our biggest competitor is the status quo and the conservative nature of audio engineers. I mean, that's probably the reality of the whole situation. So I guess that we definitely need to kind of discuss the sort of human element of this as well, which is how do you get audio engineers to begin to look at the alternatives to the traditional methodology. And I think that's one of the challenges. But I guess, going back to the point of algorithmic approach versus AI, we've originally, the origin of Llama was that one of our founders has a PhD in AI as well. So originally we were looking at, what's the best way of approaching the problem. And our specific problem was, again, from a very practical perspective. And we actually have one of our biggest clients here on the call, Anthony Sasho from Eurosports. And one of their challenges was, how do they manage all the commentaries that Eurosports has to manage? They've got 20 plus languages. How do they manage those? Just simply, as an example, balancing up the international sound with the commentaries. And what we actually found out was that from our perspective and from our tests, that actually the algorithmic approach was more pragmatic, and it was a quicker way of actually achieving the result. So, but again, we are also now sort of moving into the AI arena when it comes to sort of things like machine learning to actually improve, algorithmic DSP. So it's an interesting conversation. I don't know, Anthony, whether you want to make any comments regarding your experience of AI stroke automation.
Yeah, just one thing regarding the audio operators and your main competitor. We wanted to tell to them that we won't replace them by automatic mixing. We just want to allow them to do more.
Yeah,
that was the main difference with the huge increase of commentary production for Eurosport Player, for Discovery Plus. We had to produce a lot more. Sometimes during the Olympic, I don't remember how many concurrent sessions we had, but having one sound operator in front of a mixer for all these programs would have just been crazy. So we really had to do that. Anyway, the presence of an audio operator is, to be honest, still required. When you talk to commentators, you have to tell them to be on the input 2 of their audio, on the input 1 of their audio input of the audio interface, and not on input 2. That's why they are not on air. You still need to tell to them, no, you should be in booth 1. You should not be in booth 2. You still need to have some people to establish the connection. You will still need some human, but then, the great stuff with the atomics was really that they were able to be focused on, let's say, routing connection, and then when the mix is launched, the program can keep going on. And anyway, you can still have a lot of other issues which needs to be focused. So we'll still need some people with just the word is really to allow them to produce more.
Yeah, I think it's about augmentation. It's not about complete replacement. It's about, as you said, getting to do more with less. And I think, that's one of the practical realities that broadcasters are now facing. The budgets are going down. The amount of content that these guys need to create is going up. So how do you balance those two opposing things? And, that's where AI and automation can obviously play a role. But, we have to work against this challenge of change. It's a change process. How do you convince people to do that? And I think, Anthony, to be, without being too controversial, I think you could say that there perhaps was some kickback from internally originally with regards to the audio engineers, with regards to the results maybe, but I think we've definitely now, I think we've kind of proven that the results is doing what it needs to do.
Absolutely. The audio engineers themselves came back to us saying, wow, the result is great. That's really powerful. Some increase, let's say some level adjustment they were missing in the international sound. along the program are not missed anymore. So that's very powerful, and the result is great.
Well, the scale of this versioning and the scale of versioning that you guys do for things like the Olympics, where you have nearly 400 different feeds, there's no way to do a good job of it manually. And I think everybody goes through that now. Any production is making all these weird custom feeds for various things. And it seems like auto versioning, whether it's AI assisted or purely algorithmic, is just going to be something that allows you to do a better job than something that you can't pay attention to because you're doing 10 other things.
I think there's two things there. I think speed and consistency. I think, that's where AI and automation can really play a role. Sorry, Anthony, you were going to say.
No, nothing.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got multiple formats, immersive. Increasingly we're seeing appetite for automation within kind of a 514 Atmos MPEG-H environment. That those tools that we're producing are particularly popular at the moment because actually there's a lot of there's a skills shortage there. People are not actually used to mixing in those formats, and so to be able to automate across the board and create that metadata that enables those productions to go out and be distributed with different commentaries, I think is a really helpful tool for folks as well. And obviously commentaries is probably the biggest kind of versioning, but also I think we're seeing kind of an appetite for more hyperlocal and for more kind of experiential pieces where I want to know what it's like, not just to have the kind of vanilla broadcast, but to have more of a fan experience. And I think historically there's not enough hours in the day for a producer sound mixer to create those bespoke mixes, to create a home and away and a pub mix of a standard broadcast mix.
It's also economic viability, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the other thing. But as you said, the other factor is also skill shortage to a certain extent as well, just getting people to actually do the job. So, I think it's an exciting space to be in. I think you will agree, Rob, definitely.
Yeah, lots and lots of scope. Too much to do.
Too much to do. That's the question. We're kind of always laughing about, we're kind of we're frenemies, clearly. We're kind of approaching the same targets, and we were maybe approaching it from slightly different ways. But I think there's so much potential out there for all of us to be able to approach. It's just a question of prioritization, and may the best man win, and hopefully we all win. That's the whole idea, I guess.
Well, I think we're
pretty big playground, and I think we're
exactly it's big enough.
Well, I think we're in this sort of environment too, where we're dealing with so much change and there's so much innovation.
Yeah.
And there's an unprecedented level, I think, of cooperation between broadcasters.
There has to be.
Sharing best practices and new ideas, and we're trying this. And
my favorite thing about the broadcast industry, that is that there's such a great attitude of collaboration and support from one another, that it's not like, you're from a different company, but actually we're all, with one vision to create better experiences for viewers. I like that a lot. Yeah,
it's great. It's really great. And it's great to see, to see both, Salsa and Llama sort of pursuing some of these solutions. And I think we're just sort of the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to use these tools more and more to make better programs, whether they're better programs on a budget or whether they're fancy programs that are even better.
But I think that's interesting though, isn't it? Because that is the sort of the balance between the art of mixing and the reality of economics. And how do you get to the point where you're bringing those two together so that you're creating something which is, is as close to art as possible, but you're doing it in an economical way. And again, back to Fadi's point, there's never going to be a situation where the individual, the human is going to be completely taken out of the equation. But there are certainly jobs that it kind of makes sense, and how can we try and push those boundaries to make that as good as possible? I think that's what gets us excited, and that's what we're interested in trying to approach.
Well, and some of these tools work better. It's really hard to have the right mic open to catch kick.
Well, yeah,
we have all the other mics at the right level. It's hard to do that.
Yeah, we also have the joke about the hangover, which is, you've got an audio engineer with a really bad hangover. It's there are times you're going to miss things, but at least with AI and automation, it's going to be consistent every single time. So not saying that audio engineers are big drinkers, but I'm just I'm putting that out there to the group. That's
yeah. Well, I like the idea as well of actually raising the kind of the value of audio. So not just thinking about audio mixing, but thinking about metadata generation and kind of semantic analysis, and thinking, are there areas, and there are, where audio adds value not just to sound, but actually to every part of the production, whether that's triggering on-screen graphics based on specific events, or whether it's automatically cutting up highlight reels, or whether it's kind of other metadata just to kind of augment tagging or triggering referees' whistles, that sort of thing. I think, audio's got value to be added here, over and above what we would consider sound, but looking more into the data. And I think that's something that we're particularly interested in at the minute.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, Roger, about, and what Ewan just said as well, like there's situations where for one reason or another, and I won't bring up the drinking again, but if there's ever be like a half-ass approach, to quote your words, to a certain job, this is where we see like AI in the near term bringing that missing half of ass, to complete the.
So there's one cheek on the chair, and you need the AI for the other cheek, basically.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's sort
that's
of
a lovely
like,
image. Thank you for that.
but sort of mixing live too is like going through a whole game and not screwing up. It's sort of like, and inevitably director's hot mic is screaming, or something else happens, and you miss something.
The sound supervisor is also sorting out all the issues with the comms. And we were in a OB truck last season, and there was some kind of catastrophe with the comms network. Sound supervisors, all hands to the pump to sort that out, because that's the communication hub of the entire OB. And as a result, you get a very bland, static mix where you're not picking up the field of play action. So it's not always the fault of the sound supervisor. It's not always the the half-assed Fadi or the boozer. It could be just other issues that happen, but they do happen.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll certainly see again, versioning. We're using versioning, auto versioning today. I think we'll use more and more of it, and it will become more sophisticated. And obviously, folks like you, Anthony, are using it on a huge scale. But also, I think we'll see assisted effects mixing working its way in, and whether that's in a completely automated, autonomous role, but I think we'll see it a lot in terms of as a tool that just allows somebody who's getting pulled in a lot of different ways to do a better job with the resources that they have. So, well, listen, I think we're just about out of time, or we're just past time. It's really been great to see you all, and appreciate everybody joining us. And Anthony, good to see you, and Ewan, and everybody else on the call. Heather?
Yeah, it's fascinating discussion, really, really good. Sorry, Basil's joining in as well.
I saw that.
He's excited. He's eating sunflowers behind me. Yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you so much for everyone joining in, and you and Anthony as well. Fadi, thank you. I had big apologies to send from Andy. Apparently he's very, very unwell at the moment, and that's why he hasn't joined us. But he says sorry, so hopefully we'll get him on in the future. But next up, we are going to be seeing each other in person, I hope, at IBC.
Yes.
We've got our Sport Production Summit on the 8th of September at the De La Mar Theatre in Amsterdam. So look at the website, SVG Europe's website, to find out about that and register if you're going to be able to come over a day early. If you are going to be at the show on this Saturday evening at 6 o'clock, we've got networking in the first floor restaurant at the Rye. So please come along to that. I'll send out a message to all of you lovely audio people to come along and definitely join us, come along and find me. It'd be great to see you all in person. And then after that, we've got something special for you in December. On the 7th of December, we're going to be at King's Place in King's Cross, London, for an in-person event just for audio. So yeah, it's going to be really cool. So you'll be hearing more about that over the next 6 weeks or so, when me and Roger get our heads together on who we're going to get out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So put that all in your diaries.